And now, with Sound Investing, here's Paul Merriman.
Well, we've got a special presentation today. Chris Pedersen, our Director of Research, came out with what I thought is just a terrific article in the American Association of Individual Investors Journal. And I'm not the only one who thought it was terrific, because they chose to put the title of that article middle of the page in as big a letters as you could possibly get. And that title, it's long. I love it because I love titles that make me think that something's possible without breaking a leg. So double your lifetime purchasing power in 20 minutes. Double your lifetime purchasing power in 20 minutes. That's a big statement. I've used 101 decisions to change your financial future. The difference in my case is I don't make any claim that it's going to be better. I just hope it'll be better. But I think what's in this article, Chris, is about a better future for a whole bunch of investors. So I know you've got some PowerPoints. I would love to see them. I'm going to try to be mostly a listener, but I've seen the PowerPoints. I've got a few questions. I've read the article a couple times. It's one of those articles. There's so much in it that I think it takes a couple of reads to get everything from it. And we, by the way, are going to have a link to the AAII website where you will be able to get it. You'll have to give them your email address, but we've tested this, and it turns out that when you click under journal, and then you'll see the October journal, and we'll take you there with a link so that all you'll have to do is type your name in, your email address. So, Chris, get us started here. Tell us where did this article come from, and really, are you serious? It's 20 minutes, or is this just to get my attention?
I am serious. It's 20 minutes, and I wrote it. I wrote it a year and a half ago, and it took until this year actually to finish it and publish it. And I wanted to publish it in the fall because I think that it really pertains to people who are doing open enrollment, especially if they have an employer-provided 401k program. And the gist of the story is that for somebody who invests in the defaults of the 401k program that are most typical across the industry, and they do that for 40 years of their career, and then they do fixed 4% withdrawals in retirement, and you look at all the cash flows in and the cash flows out and the standard investment, which is a target date fund, and then you adjust for inflation and you say, well, what was the impact on how much they have to spend over a lifetime? Mm-hmm. It doubles their spending power, even adjusting for inflation, just investing in a target date fund, which is kind of unbelievable. I when I first ran those numbers, I thought that's just not possible. And so I wanted to explain the story and explain how people might even do a little bit better. And I know that the article begs some questions and there's some opportunities for clarification. And yes, I do have some PowerPoints, but we'll try and use words here that explain it for people on a podcast out for a walk so that they can get value out of it without that. So I'm going to start sharing this PowerPoint, and let's make this as interactive as we can, because I think it'll be more fun. And sometimes I go too fast anyway, so you can slow me down. So the title of the article was Double Your Lifetime Purchasing Power in 20 Minutes. And part of what powers this is what has happened to retirement portfolios over the last 20 years. Basically, because of target date funds, what you see is that in 2005, if you looked at the average investor in a 401k, they only had about 55% of their investment in equities, and the rest was in fixed income. And we know that for a young investor, it makes sense that they can take more risk because they have more time for compounding to work for them and more time to work. But I think the truth is most 25-year-olds signing up for a retirement plan they're not educated about investing. We don't do that very well in school. And so they want to be diversified, and they look at all these choices and they say, well, I'll take a little of this and a little of this and a little of this and a little of this, and I'll be diversified. And what they don't realize is that by holding a high percentage in bonds, that's going to reduce their long-term likelihood of success because it reduces their potential return substantially. So with the introduction of target date funds, people get defaulted into something that is more appropriate. And now what you see in 2021 is that the average investor in a 401k has close to a 90% allocation to equities. So it's dramatically changed. And what I wanted to see is, well, with this significant improvement in their expected return, it turns out this is like 2 to 3% across their accumulation years of expected return increase. What would their experience be? And so I ran the numbers, and to run the numbers, I had to make assumptions. And so the assumptions I made were, I looked at, well, what's the median salary in the United States? It's $68,000 a year. Well, if somebody took the typical default program that they would have in a 401k, it would start them out, it would default them to start saving at 3% of that salary, which is $2,040.
Could I ask right there, Chris, about this median salary of 68,000?
Yeah.
That it looks very similar to a number I have seen for college graduates at age 25. Or is that what this is?
I think it's the median U.S. household salary. So it's probably high for a high school graduate, and it's probably typical for a college graduate. So yeah, that's a good point. I took the median household salary, which is probably more typical of mid-career. I think since we're going to focus on purchasing power multipliers, the actual dollar amount doesn't matter as much, because if you lowered these numbers all by a factor of 2, the multipliers would stay the same. But continuing on, then the default would be you'd start at 3% and you'd get a 50% employer match, which would be $1,020 for a total of $3,060 in year one. And the automatic default for most programs is that contribution amount will increase by 1% per year. So you start with 3% in year one, then you go to 4% and 5% and 6%. And the match typically maxes out at $3,000 per year. So I've got a table here that shows how that plays out, but you start out in year one with a total contribution of $3,060, and then it ramps up till in year 8, you've got a total contribution of $9,800, and that $9,800 then stays constant until you retire, as long as you're working.
Now, you have mentioned this several times now, that this is the most common automatic 401k combination of how much, where they put you, I guess, and how much they're going to put in. Did you actually see a number of how many plans have this built in, or is it just generally known that this is the most common default automatic 401k setting?
I took this there's a Vanguard report called How America Saves that they publish, and I took this out of the most recent Vanguard report. And so these were the most common, and I would say that this is probably about half of people who have an employer match 401k plan would see this sort of experience. Some people might see something a little bit better, a little bit worse. Some people won't have a default. Some people might have to make all these choices on their own. But I thought if I'm modeling something, I'll just pick the one that is the most common. Yeah. So what happens if you follow this plan? That's kind of the next question. And you ask a question. I'm going to follow up on the next page with, well, if we didn't inflation adjust it, what does it look like? I wanted to look at the real purchasing power. I wanted to look at the inflation adjusted dollars, and I'll show you why in a second. But the reason I wanted to look at the inflation adjusted dollars is that I want to know how much your purchasing power changes. So how much do you get to buy with the money that's invested, not just how big did the account get. So we'll look at it both ways. But if we look in the working years at somebody who just is a spendthrift, they don't save anything. They basically have the dollars they made to spend. You get your dollars, you spend some of it on taxes. That is a spend. You spend it on taxes. It may not be a choice, but you spend it. And then you get the rest. So the baseline assumption would be you spend everything you made, and that would be a lifetime purchasing power multiplier of 1. You made a certain amount of money and you spent it all. So you got a lifetime purchasing power of 1. But if you look at somebody who saves this roughly 10% into a target date fund, so that's the top of this bar, and you look at how much it grows to in inflation adjusted purchasing power, it grows to more purchasing power than the total money that was made in the working years. And about half of it gets spent in retirement, about half of it gets passed on to heirs. And that's the median amount. So some people see a little more, some people see a little bit less. But that's an amazing truth. Now, you ask the question, well, what would have happened if we just looked at this in nominal terms, just the account balances? So I did that. And you'll see why I don't want to look at these numbers this way. Basically, what it says is that the amount you get to spend in retirement and the amount you pass on to heirs, if you don't adjust for inflation, is about 3 times the total amount you made while you were working. Now, if I was looking at these numbers, I'd say, wow, you're oversaving. It's like, that's ridiculous. I don't have any need to have 3 times as much money in retirement as I had while I was working. But you will actually need 3 times as much money because there's going to be inflation. And so that's why I don't look at it without adjusting for inflation. And the difference in the names for those two things, when we look at the dollars adjusted for inflation, that's a real return or a real balance. And when we look at it, including the inflation, but I'm not adjusting it back to today's dollars, that's nominal returns or nominal balances. So I know this was important to you, Paul. Did we address a question?
I appreciate it. I do think it's important people get that. By the way, those people who did not save, and there are a lot of them. I don't remember the percentage, and there are reasons why people don't save, but they basically are counting on Social Security, and there are a lot of people who survive with Social Security. They're not going to have the kind of lifestyle, money-wise, certainly, that the people who save have. But no, I think that's terrific.
Yeah, and I didn't include Social Security here, and it was one of the first comments somebody made on the article. And the biggest reason I didn't is it would be very complicated to figure it out because it depends a lot on how much you make. Somebody who makes more money will be helped less by Social Security in retirement. Somebody who makes less money will be helped more by Social Security in retirement. It will help everyone. It's not that I don't appreciate the program. I think it's a good program to have a way to help increase the financial security of our older population, it's just it would have made the analysis too complicated. Yeah.
By the way, I have to note, if you think about what's what's going to happen in January, an 8% increase.
Yeah.
Social Security payments. How many people have ever had an 8% raise in their life? That is going to be a big deal. I know the dollars don't buy as much as they used to, but it's going to feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know this sounds too good to be true. And because of that, I did an analysis where I showed in the article how much your contributions are for every decade and how much the investment return is for every decade. So if you look at ages 25 to 35, and by 35 here, I mean the first day of your 35th year, and the first day of your 25th year. So we could have done 25 to 34. You made that comment, but if we look at ages 25 to 35, you make $71,500 in contributions with these assumptions, and you get $23,500 in investment return. Not bad. If you look at ages 35 to 45, and these are all the median real numbers, you make $98,000 in contributions and you get $120,000 in return. That is kind of amazing. In only 20 years, you've gotten to where the return from the investments that you've made is exceeding your new contributions. Ages 45 to 55, still 98,000 in contributions and $300,000 in return. Ages 55 to 65, 98,000 in contributions and $435,000 in return. So by the time you're approaching retirement, your returns are greatly exceeding your contributions. And in fact, one of the milestones a lot of people reach in those later years is their returns start to exceed their income.
The returns here, the median real return, approximately how much is that return? And let me make sure I understand. You went all the way back to 1928 on building this study. So we got the deflationary period in there from the 30s. We've got the Depression. We've got whatever, all those good and bad things that happened over the last 90 plus years. What is that median real return?
Let me hold on a sec. I got to go to a resource. I'm going to pull up my book here, Two Funds for Life.
Two Funds for Life.
And I can look at the appendix where I have the 1928 returns. And I can look at a target date fund. And I can tell you that across a lifetime, so this includes accumulation and withdrawal, your expected median real return dollar weighted was about 5.6%. So in these years approaching retirement, it would be higher. It would be a little bit higher. It's probably, 6 or 7%. And in the earlier years, it might be 7 or 8%. And in the later years, it's going to be, lower. So, yeah.
Okay, so 5.6 is the real. What does that, and I realize again, it's the median number. What does that then convert to nominal? Because I've been
9.8%.
9.8.
9.8. Yeah, this was going back to 1928. Yep.
So what I've been telling people, and I've been giving them a number that's too low. I've been telling people that when you look at a lifetime of target date fund returns, this is during the accumulation period, it's about an 8% average return. What you're saying is it's closer, it's over 9.
Well, keep in mind that that's a dollar weighted return across a lifetime with cash flow assumptions. So if you did a lump sum investment, you'd get a different answer. And I'm not sure whether the number you were using was lump sum. And the other thing is, going back to 1928 versus 1970, you'd get different answers. So, and that's in the book. We could pull that out, but I don't think
that's
we
a great thing. I'm sorry to take you off the
subject. No, that's okay. So the next phase in the chart is retirement, and so from ages 65 to 75, you are taking out $500,000 roughly in withdrawals, and you're getting about a $635,000 return. So in those early years, the target date fund is still a little bit more aggressive, the early years of retirement, enough so that the average retiree is going to see their nest egg grow, which is a great comfort, I think, for a retiree in those first 5 years, to be able to live off their investments and have a likelihood that it still grows. That gives them a lot of comfort. From 75 to 85 and 85 to 95, the investment returns and the withdrawals are approximately the same in the median real case. Yeah.
And Chris, just to be sure, I understand the basis for all of this. You are using the Vanguard Target Date Fund glide path, correct?
I'm using that as an allocation, and I'm modeling it as best I can. Yes.
Okay. I mean, obviously, there was no S&P 500 in 1928. I mean, it's
right.
You got to use a lot of hypothetical information to build these things.
Right.
But from 65 to 75, just to give a little perspective there, where you're still making more money than you're taking out. During that period of time, what do they go from about 50% equity down to 30% equity?
Yes.
So by 75, it doesn't get any, they don't go any lower than 30% equity. Okay, just to give it perspective.
It actually, I think by 72, they get to the 30%. It's about 7 years after retirement.
Okay.
So the thought that thousands of dollars of contribution per year can amount to millions of dollars of benefit, it sounds unbelievable. But when you look at it decade by decade, looking at the real dollars and the financial returns, you can see how it plays out. And older investors, having lived through this, know that it's true. And it's kind of amazing, but it's true. It's very likely most people across their lives will make more nominal dollars for sure, and even real purchasing power dollars from their investments than they do from their working, which it's kind of an astounding truth for most people. Mm-hmm. So the young investor details, I put them down on this chart, and then I figured out if you take the dollars you get in the real dollars you get in retirement and the real dollars you get in legacy that you pass on, and you divide that by the real dollars that you made in your working years, what is your lifetime purchasing power multiplier? And so for the person who didn't save, the lifetime purchasing power multiplier is 1. You get the purchasing power that you got the day you got your paycheck. For this typical 20-minute automatic sign-up plan, the median lifetime purchasing power multiplier is 2. The bad luck or 10th percentile lifetime purchasing power multiplier was 1.5. So there will be some people who don't double their money, but still 1.5 is a lot better than 1. And the best case scenario, or the 90th percentile, was 2.4. Now we can improve on this, and that's what we'll talk about next, because target date funds have flaws. But yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I want people to know this is right out of the article, so that
yes, if this is right out of the article.
See this, they can. I'm trying to picture all of these 40-year periods that you looked at in the accumulation. And that means sometimes where inflation was almost non-existent, and the time when inflation was really high. So
yeah, we used every starting month going from 1928 through 2021. Yeah. So when we run out of time, we loop back. So some of the scenarios start in, say, 2020 and then loop back to 1928. And we do that to avoid oversampling the middle years. So it covered a lot of history. Yeah. Hundreds of scenarios.
Yeah. All right. Because, the fact that these are all inflation adjusted. See, one of the things people may not know is there are periods the market didn't do very well, but inflation was low. And there were times the market did beautifully, but inflation was high. And what you've done is you've taken that out of the formula and just shown what did you have in purchasing power, not how did you look in terms of the number you can put on a piece of paper.
Yep, and we will look later at the impact of some changes that we can make on the safe withdrawal rates in retirement too. So this got us to the point of looking at what could you do with the automatic target date fund, but the next question was, could we do better? Because we know the target date fund has a couple of things that we don't like. The first is that the target date fund carries bonds in the early years, which makes it a little more conservative than it really needs to be. It probably costs the young investor about 0.5% per year to have that 10% allocation in bonds over the 40-year period. The other thing is that a target date fund is built of total market funds. And that means there's no meaningful exposure to the small or the value parts of the market. Now, before I go ahead, like how can that be? It owns the small and the value parts of the market. Well, the small part of the market it owns is offset by the large part of the market it owns. The value part of the market it owns is offset by the growth part of the market it owns. The only way you can get some meaningful diversification and potential higher returns from the premiums from those parts of the market is to have disproportionate or overweighted parts of those. So we look at what would happen if you compensate for these shortcomings in a target date fund by adding some small cap value. Before we get to that, though, Paul, you asked again about nominal. So I did throw the nominal numbers on here.
Great.
And again, if we went back and said, I'm just going to go with this default scenario, how much money would you make starting with a salary of $68,000 and increasing with inflation across 40 years? You'd actually make $6.2 million, which is kind of staggering. And how much would you save? You would save with the match from your employer, $737,000, and your investment balance when you get to retirement would be $6.8 million. So somebody who's making $68,000 a year would say, why do I need $6.8 million in retirement? That's just, I'm oversaving. And you'd spend $8.5 million in your retirement years, and you'd end up leaving $11.2 million to your heirs. And again, like, well, why would I leave $11 million to my heirs when I just started retirement with $6.8 million? But when we adjust it all for inflation, what you realize is that you basically end up with a end balance that's roughly equal to what you started with in the median case. And so that means you preserve this nest egg, its real purchasing power, and you can feel more confident about it as you go. Yeah. So, all right. So let's take a look at these ways we could improve. Here's the target date fund. And as I said, we start out here with these 10% allocation to bonds. This is the Vanguard target retirement glide path. And that's what we're going to try and compensate for. And then you can see it's made up of basically total market funds in these early years. So we've got the total international market and the total U.S. market are what it's made up for. So no meaningful allocation to small in value. And so we ask how we can compensate for that.
Yeah, and Chris, just for the people listening, the red area is the U.S. equity, and the yellow area, gold area, whatever it is international. It's about 70% of the equity is typically U.S. and about 30% of the equity is in international. So just to give some perspective to that.
Yep, that's right. and people on the podcast won't see this, so I'll just comment on it. People who observe this closely will notice that as you approach retirement, as you said earlier, Paul, at retirement, you're at a 50% allocation to equities, and about 7 years later, you're at about a 30% allocation to equities. And not only do you shift towards bonds, but approaching retirement, they start to bring in treasury, inflation protected bonds, and even some cash to just make it all less volatile and more conservative. And for investors who get into retirement and are comfortable with it and start to feel confident they're going to do okay, they may choose to be less conservative than this. They might decide to either choose a target date fund with a different date, because that would make them more aggressive if they choose a later date, or to hold additional small cap value, or to hold additional equity funds. There's a lot of ways they could adjust. Yeah. So if we're going to compensate here with small cap value, maybe investors won't have access to that in their 401k. So to make it easy, what we'll do is we'll think about two ways to do it where you could add that small cap value in a second fund. And basically the gist of it is we won't require any rebalancing. We'll just say that maybe they open an IRA outside of their employer savings program, and they put some portion of their retirement savings into a U.S. small cap value fund. Now, for somebody with a 401k who has access to a small cap value fund, it's even easier. They just change the default contributions, and they can automate these plans as well. And again, to keep it simple, we've asked that people save 10 pennies out of every dollar in their retirement savings, 10%. What we're going to do is we're going to say, take one of those pennies and put it into the U.S. small cap value. And that'll be the 90-10 strategy here. So 9 pennies go into the target date fund, 1 penny goes into the small cap value fund out of every dollar you make. We'll also look at an 80-20 strategy where you take 8 pennies and you put them into the target date fund, and 2 pennies and you put them into the small cap value fund. What happens to the lifetime purchasing power multipliers using all of the same assumptions we used before? Well, now the median, remember, it was about a factor of 2 multiplier for the target date fund. For the 90-10, it goes to 2.5. The 80-20 goes to 3.3. So the median, that means 50% of people have better and 50% of people have worse experience. The median experience for just taking 2 pennies and putting them in the small cap value fund went from a 2 times lifetime purchasing power multiplier to over a 3 times lifetime purchasing power multiplier. And the bad luck scenarios all got better as well. So the bad luck scenario for the target date fund was 1.5 times. The 90-10 is 1.